And welcome to the Ask More Questions podcast. Today I'm here with TJ McArdle. TJ, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Well, I don't think I can complain. Actually, I could complain because I've had to I had to get a tree trimmer out today and give me an estimate because we have trees that we've had a lot of winds here in the Midwest, a lot of rain. I'm sure it has nothing to do with climate change, and I'm starting to get a little worried. And so, I'm like, I should probably take care of these trees. And this is, yeah, it's like $1,200, which is,
Yikes.
yeah. I mean, the last time I did it was during the pandemic, so it's really, if you think about it, spread out over a few years. That's not so
It's
bad.
probably time,
Yeah, but
unfortunately.
it's that subtle reminder that adulting sucks.
Right. And one of the cons of home ownership, there's lots of pros, but there are some cons, right?
Yeah, yeah, and all the cons tend to be, money related, most of the time, so
Hmm.
oh, well. But yeah, thanks for coming on. Thought we'd, talk a little bit about, your, deconstruction story, but first, let's go back to the beginning. Tell me about, like, where you grew up and what your family was like.
Okay. I grew up in Montana, rural Montana, a little tiny town. Um, so tiny, I think there were like 23 people in my graduating class
Yeah.
back in 1986. I'm dating myself now. Um, I was born into a Christian family and raised as a Christian, indoctrinated into it, was a believing Christian. Um, Neither mom nor dad were churchgoers, though they didn't like church. My dad didn't like it because after he divorced my mom, he married a Catholic woman, and the Catholic Church excommunicated her for marrying a divorced man because, the Catholics
Oh,
don't recognize divorce.
right.
Um, that really angered him. His parents were Lutheran. In fact, my dad's side of the family were some of the founding community members of my little hometown. My great grandparents immigrated from Norway, homesteaded under the Homestead Act, meaning they were able to homestead tens of thousands of acres of beautiful real estate in Montana for like a $100 filing fee is all.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and they helped build the very Lutheran church that my dad's family were members of. Um, and then my mom's side were evangelicals, and she did not like the strict evangelical rules. So she wasn't a churchgoer either. But both were Christians, both were believers. My grandparents, my maternal grandparents, um, basically took responsibility for my religious upbringing. They dragged me to church whenever they had the
Mhm.
opportunity. So, in other words, whenever I was staying with them was a good 30 to 40% of my childhood I lived with them. Um,
Yeah.
and before I was old enough to be alone, I would have to go to church with them. They sent me to Bible camp in the summertime. Um, so, yeah, and I was a believer until about my 30s.
Yeah.
Um, so
Well,
you want
you
to talk about
s
what
s
triggered
so
my deconstruction?
well, tell me a little bit about the how does that work whenever, I mean, you said you've got a religious household, but you didn't attend church. So does that I don't know. I tend to think about all the denominations and how they're all splintered and have the different ways at looking at just theology, I guess, and you know
Well, the religious household was my grandparents' household, and like I
okay,
said before, I lived with them about 30 to 40% of my childhood. So it
okay,
was
so
in that respect, it was a religious household,
yeah,
and they were evangelical. So the
yeah,
bulk of my exposure to Christianity was the evangelical form of Christianity. Although I have to say my grandparents were very sweet people. They were nothing like the evangelicals you see today.
uh-huh,
Um, but there were other members of their church that were, and so Even from a very young age, I was also, like my mother, very turned off by the evangelical church.
Yeah. My grandparents on my mother's side were, Southern Baptist, I think, and I was raised Southern Baptist, but like what you were saying, that they were nice. They were not terrible people, and that was just a different time,
I
whenever
think
I think
grandparents
about it.
mellow out too when they get older, because my
Oh,
mother said,
yeah.
her parents were very strict. When she was, a kid, they didn't allow her
Yeah.
to wear makeup as a teenager.
Uh-huh.
They were very strict, and they weren't strict with me or the rest of my generation. So I think they mellowed out a lot with age. I think as grandparents get older, some, maybe probably not all, they choose their battles more carefully.
Yeah, they probably have that experience that tells them, may not be worth it."
Yeah.
So so you did that, you're pretty much, brought up in evangelicalism, and then until your 30s, and then sometime in your I mean, I don't know, like, I was gonna say sometime in your 30s, your deconstruction kicked off, but if I'm to be completely honest, I think those of us that are inquisitive, we probably asked some questions here and there over time that, looking back on it, it may have been the deconstruction might have started, uh, decades before, but it's not until it I would say goes in full whenever it's like you can't stop the deconstruction at that point. Like you're kind of you're going down the hill and you're on the sled and you can't stop. Is so? Did you have was it in your 30s that process kind of like started the whole snowball down the hill?
It did, and it wasn't intentional. I didn't go into it intending to deconstruct or lose my faith. Um, when I was about 30 and pregnant with my first child, I have 3 of them now, but, and thinking about getting her baptized, and by that time I was living in Southern California, for about 10 years, so no longer in the area with where my family was in the evangelical church, and was kind of excited because I thought, I get to pick my own church, I get to pick my own denomination, um, which I knew I better get started on. I mean, it was pretty early in my pregnancy, so I thought I better get started on this because, I have to really become a member of the denomination, I think probably before they'll agree to baptize my child.
Yeah,
Can't just walk in and say, "Hey, here's this baby." Um, so that's where it began, and I thought, well, how do you pick a church? How do you decide what denomination you wanna be? And I realized that the probably the main difference between denominations is how they interpret scripture, which that alone should have been a red flag right there, because why are there so many different interpretations of the supposedly perfect word of God, right? But it didn't trigger any red flags. I didn't think of it at the time. So I thought, well, I guess I better decide how I interpret scripture. And up to that point, I hadn't read the entire Bible myself. Like most Christians, I just knew a few select verses that were taught to me in church or Sunday school or Bible camp. So I thought, well, I've been meaning to do this. I'll do it now. So
yeah,
out my Bible and I started on page 1. And by the time I got through not even probably halfway of the Old Testament, that's when the crisis of faith started. Um,
that'll do it.
yeah,
Do
yeah.
do you remember if there was one of the specific stories that really, stuck out to you where you're just like, "What
I
is
don't
this?"
remember what the first one was, but I do remember definitely the commands to commit genocide,
Yeah,
um, the misogyny, the slavery. Um, and when I started expressing concerns to family members, Christian family members, which they're all Christian, they were saying, "Well, yeah, but just wait till you get to the New Testament. It gets much better."
mhm,
Um, and I didn't feel that much better either when I got to the New Testament. Paul especially is such a misogynist, and that really bothered me. Um, so I yeah, I thought, "You know what? This can't be the right Bible. There must be a different Bible out there that, because this the God in this Bible is not my God. That's not my God. That's not the God I was raised to believe in. There must be a better version of the Bible out there." So the next step was to look at all the different versions and try to find the quote unquote right one. And I
Whatever
didn't.
that means, right?
Yeah, I realized after doing that all the versions are just as horrible. Um, and I started asking myself, I'm a little embarrassed to admit it now, but up until then, I had never questioned who wrote this thing? How was it written? Um, it, I guess I just always thought it just kind of fell out of the sky or sprang from a burning bush or something. And I thought, I'm going to look into that. So I started looking into the history of Christianity and how the Bible came together, how they chose all which manuscripts were included and which were discarded. Um, Looking at the history of Christianity and then the history of religion in general, and started looking at it from I guess, an anthropological perspective. Like, how do people come up with religions, and how have they all come up? I became really fascinated with paganism,
Okay.
um, and
How are we defining that? Because,
that's really a tough question. That's a
yeah,
loaded question because, there are so many different pagan traditions. I tended to lean towards Celtic, paganism. I really was fascinated with that. So, but we've got, there's Egyptian, Polynesian, African, Greco-Roman. But I was really fascinated with it, especially Druidry. Um, I need to clarify though that once I stopped, by the time I was starting to really have doubts about whether or not there were any gods at all. And by the time I deconstructed from Christianity and stopped believing in the God of the Bible, I never went back to believing in any other gods. So
it's
I
interesting.
never believed in any of the pagan pantheons. But I did
Right.
find the reverence for nature. I found that how all their holy days involve like the solstices and the equinoxes. I I found that fascinating. So I got into that and identified as a neo-pagan and again, like specifically of the Celtic variety, um, for about 10 years. And I had a huge following on a Facebook page that I started, um, that I was active on every day, either posting or moderating comments. After about 10 years of identifying as a neo-pagan and being really involved in the local, pagan community, um, as well as online. Um, I started to see how a lot of other pagans were trying to dictate how other pagans acted or believed and what is quote unquote
My.
a proper pagan, a real pagan. And I
Yeah.
thought this is no better than Christianity. I see that,
It's really not the way you put it like that. I
yeah,
mean, you
yeah.
you and I have
That
seen,
kind of turned me off. And
yeah, it's like,
I'm
already done that.
still I still have the huge appreciation for the elements of that a paganism that I mentioned earlier, the reverence for nature and that. But a around that time too, I got onto Twitter. I hadn't been on Twitter before, and I got into Twitter, and I almost instantaneously, kind by accident, became a member of the atheist community on Twitter, and um, which taught me a lot about atheism, which I didn't really know anything about prior to this. I had never, even though I didn't believe in gods anymore, I had never identified as an atheist because of the negative connotation. I'd been raised to believe atheists were evil. They believed in evil. They wanted to create chaos. They worshiped the devil. Um, And so
Sorry.
I'm not an atheist, I don't believe in any gods, but I'm not
Yeah.
an atheist. How dare you?
Well,
Um,
if I could pause you right real quick, where do you think that those ideas came from?
Definitely from my Christian upbringing.
Okay.
For me, yeah.
Yeah.
And and I think a lot of people,
Yeah, it's almost like
a
they get
lot
a
of people were
manual.
raised to believe that.
Yeah, it's almost like they get a manual or a handout or something, and they're like, "Okay, this is what we believe about atheists. We don't know if it's true, and we don't even know if these terms are lining up to true definitions, but this is what we believe, and you just need to repeat
Mhm,
it without thinking
mhm.
about it." Because yeah, we've all heard some similar things about atheists eating babies or something like that, or they're Satanists. And I go on what I call mega walks with friends of mine where they're like 3 to 5 miles where we just walk. And that's walking is like a byproduct. The main goal is to just chat. We're just getting a little exercise while we do that. But at one point, he and I were my friend from Saturday, we mentioned something about Satanist, and even he didn't know what a modern Satanist believed. He had pretty much only
Mhm.
knew what and he's not religious, but he only knows what he's heard on TV,
Right?
and I'm like, well,
I
most
was
Satanists are
I was
atheists.
guilty of that for a long time too, yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. So
No, it's fine.
you're diving in, you're getting welcomed into the atheist community by accident on Twitter, and then
Yeah, because I got onto Twitter, I started on my Facebook page, I started getting to a lot of debates with Christians, and I really enjoyed that. As you can see on Threads, I really
yes,
love it. I have a lot
yeah,
of fun with it, and
you
I
like
thought,
to
"I
poke the
really like
bear
this.
every once
I
in a
wanna
while.
do
Yes,
more of this." So I started my Twitter account for that purpose, just to debate Christians, not to promote atheism, if there is such a thing, if you can do that or anything like that. But a
well, there
lot
is
of
a club,
atheists
and the
started
membership fees
following
are
me.
pretty low, though.
Yeah, a lot of atheists started following me and engaging in my discussions, and it was shortly after that that I realized, "Hey, I'm an atheist." And I changed my Twitter handle and everything, and it was around that time too that I became an anti-theist. Up until then, for like, that 10 years, the 6 years through deconstruction and the 10 almost 10 years as a pagan, so, probably for at least 15 years, I was really kumbaya about all of it, like, "Oh, it's okay still that other people believe, there's no harm in it."
Yeah,
But around this time, and this was I can't remember how long ago it was, but around this time, I was paying closer attention to current events. I was studying history a lot more, and I was realizing that religious beliefs, particularly Abrahamic, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and Hinduism not far behind, um, had been creating a lot of harm throughout history and were continuing to do so. And so I started to become an anti-theist. And so fast forward, I don't know how long it took, but I had, probably over 100,000 followers. I became a huge part of the Twitter atheist community. I was known as deity free. Um, my avatar was a woman biting into an apple. Um,
nice.
I got off Twitter a few times, got back on, had to rebuild up my following,
Yeah,
and then finally got off of it permanently when Elon took over. I
yeah,
recently started up the same account again just so I can go back and look at certain posts that I hear about on other platforms. I'm like, "What is this?" I wanna go in there and just check it out, but I can't even remember the last time I logged in. But yeah, I had this huge following. I was really enjoying it. Really enjoyed the debates. I don't follow a very strict debate format. I was never in debate club or anything like that in high school or whatever,
right.
but yeah, so yeah, I do enjoy it. So I went from, yeah, Christian to to non-believer who still thought, well, it's okay if other people believe, to an anti-theist.
Mhm. Is that where you're at these days? Just
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm still there.
I float back and forth. I mean, I have a appreciation for the religious practitioners of the world who have become more liberal. So progressive, and I can no longer just say progressive Christians because when I look at New York City's mayor, I'm like, well, he's Muslim, but this dude seems to be pretty progressive, right? So obviously, uh, well, I mean, you never know, obviously, but I would say from initial outward appearances, he doesn't seem like someone that is going to be as strict as like maybe my neighbor who went to the Baptist church with me. Uh, you know,
Yeah, and I
uh,
don't the anti-theist is a there should be a better word for it because it's really anti-theism.
yeah,
It's like, I'm not against the people, like you just said. You're not against, Mom Donnie,
yeah,
and other progressives and liberals. You're not against them personally as people. You're just against their religion, and so,
right.
they're really
Anti-theism is I
it's
like that. Yeah.
anti-theism, yeah,
Mm,
it's because you still many of the people that I love and that I really, appreciate and are a part of my life are still believers, so, yeah, I'm
yeah.
not it's hate the believe, not the believer.
Right. Yes, and I got an email notification today that my shirt that says that exact phrase is on the way. So it's a colorful little like rainbow looking Baphomet, and that's what it says. Love the hate the belief, love the believer. So I'm excited to get that. I don't have a shirt like that. So but here's my flip side on the whole anti-theism part. That yes, you're right. We're not. I mean, people are people, and we've all succumbed to, or not all of us, but many of us throughout history have succumbed to the religion virus, and then some of us got better. But um, I, even with the progressives, I still think, well, you're still believing in something that, from my point of view, I don't think anyone should believing in because it doesn't seem real. And if you like you had mentioned how you did a lot of reading into history and then you compare that with the book, whatever, insert your sacred text here, and then you start looking at mythology, and then you're like, wait a minute, these all this has got to be mythology, right? Because it's isn't it interesting to think that back in Roman times that they had other gods that they believed in, and that. Do you
Yeah,
think
they
there were?
literally believe them, and I'm
Yeah,
amazed at how many Christians don't understand that. They
yeah,
think that Greco-Roman mythology was always mythology.
yeah,
They don't know that tens of millions of people worshipped that pantheon for at least 1,000 years, if not longer.
yeah.
But
Think there
yeah,
were any Dionysus
I don't.
apologists?
So, and I just looked into it too before I got online with you, because I was curious. There are an estimated 100,000 people on the planet today that still believe in the Greco-Roman pantheon.
Wow,
Yeah,
not a big
Hellenism.
number, but not nothing.
Not a big number, but yeah, the fact that there are even that many is remarkable. But I don't really care about what the progressives believe. I care that they, if, and I don't think they all do, promote it, that they're propagating it, they're perpetuating it. Um, like, keep it to yourself. Don't try to bring other people into it. I wish they wouldn't indoctrinate their children into it. Believe whatever you want to believe. Believe in leprechauns. I don't care. But when you start telling me you know, I'm gonna burn in hell for not bowing down to the king leprechaun, then that's when I have a problem. And I don't care if it's a progressive or a conservative who's promoting that idea, that I have a problem.
What do you think about the idea? The literal translation. or I should say groups of people taking the Bible literally, as I understand it, is fairly new in the grand scheme of things. It's like it's only a couple of 100 years old, right? Like that kind of mentality of like, oh, we need to take this Bible like literally. And then you have the other side that's like, no, there's a bunch of metaphors and whatever different ways of looking at God. Of course, like you, I got to the same point where I didn't switch to something else. I just went straight to, I mean, I was agnostic for a solid 2 weeks, but after that I was just like, no, I don't think there's anything. I don't think there are any gods. And what do you think about that though? The people that interpret that book as being more metaphor, more rather than
Um,
literally.
Even though I really have a problem with the people who promote it, literally,
Yeah.
um, I honestly have more respect for them for being consistent, because the people who say it's metaphor, it's only certain parts that are metaphor, and it's the parts that are problematic. It's that they decide are metaphor, and I usually in a discussion or a debate will challenge them, how do you decide which passages need to be taken metaphorically and which need to be taken literally? Was the resurrection only metaphor? Because I think most Christians, and even the ones who um, say things like, the genocide and then the other really horrible atrocities were all metaphor, or the creation story was metaphor or whatever. I don't think they'll I don't think you'll ever find one who would say the resurrection was just metaphor. I think they all believe Jesus resurrected. Um,
Yeah.
so they pick and choose what they want to, how they want to interpret. And I, I just think that's cowardly, personally.
This is why I like you, because we're on the same page. And if there's anything I need is someone to always reinforce everything that I already believe. But no, but no, I feel the same way that whenever it's like, okay, so if historically that the Bible was usually taken with a grain of salt, so to speak, you got some metaphor, you've got some good stories, some lessons to learn out of that. I share the exact same sentiment. Where do you draw that line? What are the indicators that allow me to know when? I mean, clearly, if you read any of the New Testament and get into the red letters, and Jesus is telling a parable, and it usually starts off with some sort of verbiage that indicates that it's a parable or he's telling a story. It's like it's easy to figure that out from the rest of the text that is
Yeah,
not, you know what I
but
mean?
let's talk about the parables though, because I get that excuse, that apologetic so often, but that doesn't fly with me because what is a parable? If you look up the definition of parable, it is a moral lesson. It is a story meant to teach a moral lesson. So in Luke 19:27, when Jesus says, he tells the parable about the king and who there were, well, let's just fast forward to the ending where he says, those who don't bow down to me need to be killed. Bring them before me and kill them. That is a
Metaphorically.
moral lesson. I don't care that it's a parable. He is If it's meant to teach a moral lesson, he's teaching his disciples, kill those who don't bow down to me. Because he's the king in that parable. He tells this parable just before he goes into Jerusalem, and he's being lauded as the king of the Jews.
Hmm.
Um, so that apologetic is just a parable. That doesn't fly with me. It's still teaching his followers that they should be killing off those who don't follow him.
Yeah. This is where uh, this is uncomfortable for me to say, but I had a friend who is no longer my friend because that's what happens when you deconstruct, and especially if you deconvert. But I mean, deconstruct, you might keep some of your friends. But when you deconvert and your friends were from Christendom, then you probably will lose them. That's just a sad reality. But at one point, now this guy lives in Kansas, and I lived in Kansas for a while too, and so we're very familiar with the Westboro Baptist Church. You've probably heard of the Westboro Baptist
Oh, yeah.
Church, yes. And he made a comment to me one time. He said, as despicable as their methods are, the Westboro Baptist Church is actually closer to what the Bible says about certain topics. And I had to think about that, and I was like, yeah, I think you might be right on some things. I didn't even agree with it, and I was still a Christian then, and it's like I don't agree with Westboro Baptist Church, but at the same time, like, you just give that example, and I'm like, well, when I look at Christian nationalism and things like MAGA, and because I consider MAGA to be another denomination, um, but and maybe borderline another religion entirely. But whenever I look at that, I'm like, yeah, they're kind of doing. If you were to just read the Bible as we were, raised to kind of read it and understand it, that's a pretty accurate about. That's how you would interpret it, right? I mean, to be violent for God.
Yeah, and it's not the only passage. Luke 19:27 is not the only passage. Um, I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. And then there's another passage that instructs his disciples to purchase a literal sword.
Mm-hmm.
There's Paul's in his letters talking about how unbelievers deserve death. And that's just the New Testament. Now, there are Old Testament passages that just flat out
Oh yeah,
command followers to execute non-believers and people of other religions. And
people just from the
I've
neighboring
not
town.
seen anything in the New Testament where Jesus said, "Psych, no, never mind, no, cancel that out." A lot that new covenant thing that doesn't fly with me either,
Yeah.
um, because it doesn't change the moral judgment of anything in the Old Testament. Um, just because
Right.
you just because Christians will use the new covenant to decide that they no longer are required to follow those commands uh, doesn't change the morality of those commands. And it also doesn't necessarily mean that they can't still do it if they want to. They're just not required to do it anymore. Um, uh, li- like how the Old Testament um, describes menstruating as a sin, something that women
Yeah.
have no control over.
No
But
control.
it's a sin that requires atonement. Now, Christians will argue endlessly or with me about that. It's not a sin, blah, blah, blah. I said, it says right in there that you have to take a lamb or two doves to your local priest every month as a sin offering. That's exactly what it says, as a sin offering for
Mhm.
because it requires atonement. If it First of all, they call it a sin offering. Secondly, if it's not considered a sin, it shouldn't require atonement. Um, and this new covenant thing doesn't change that. I'm supposed to believe Jesus died for me to forgive me for the sin of menstruating. Um,
Oh, I'm sorry. That's, so sad and hilarious all at the same time.
right.
I have never once thought about the connection, probably because I don't have that particular issue, thankfully.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh,
Also, in Leviticus in the same book, these are Leviticus 12 and Leviticus 15 too, if you want to look these up. Giving birth is a sin, and giving birth to a girl is twice as sinful. Um, they're unclean, and they have to quarantine for, I think it's 30 or I think it's 30 days. I'd have to look it up again, but I think it's 30 days for a boy and 60 days for a girl. And it wasn't too long ago that I had this debate with a Christian who was saying, "Well, that's because, that's just for sanitary reasons." Because blood, can contain all kinds of pathogens and
Right.
diseases and stuff. And I'm like, "Well, what is it about a woman's blood that makes it twice as, um, infectious if she gives birth to a girl?"
Well,
He couldn't
because it's a girl. That's why. I
exactly. And
mean,
then there's some of that misogyny I was talking about.
yeah,
Uh,
just kind of rears its head every so often.
yeah. And again, so they don't have to give offerings to the priests anymore to atone for these sins because Jesus died, blah, 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 blah. That doesn't change the fact that the Bible says menstruating and giving birth are sins, and giving birth to a girl is twice as sinful. Um, so yeah, that's just one example of why that whole new covenant thing, I just I it doesn't work on me.
Yeah, that's excellent insight and something that I never made the connection about how that the uncleanliness could be equated to sin. I mean, I guess that makes sense now that I say it out loud, but I never thought of it. I looked at it as you said that somebody else had made that comment about like, oh, this was about cleanliness, just like the whole circumcision thing, right? Which which I now think is awful. And I have two girls and a boy, and the in hindsight, I wish that we wouldn't have done the circumcision because I feel like it's genital mutilation now. I That's how I see it.
Yeah,
um, versus then, it was like, oh, you were. I was told the same thing. Like, I mean, not officially, but like the things that you hear, it's like, oh, it's about cleanliness, And I'm like, no. If I look back at it, I think the only reason why we do this is some sort of religious influence on the medical community for all, which I find odd, but um, yeah, and that's because it's unclean, right? I mean, you got like Moses had to be. I mean, he almost got his life ended because he wasn't circumcised, and you know,
ejaculation is also considered a sin,
yeah,
which requires, offerings and atonement, and in the New Testament required the murder of Jesus so that so men could be forgiven for ejaculation. But then the Bible tells us, "Go forth and multiply." We're commanded to go forth and procreate. So, I mean, make it make sense.
well, it no, well, it doesn't, and it doesn't make sense
It
when you
doesn't.
take
No.
time. Whenever you take time to go through the reading slowly and really try to digest what it says, because I think that whenever you can just kind of read it like a story and kind of skim over it and not get into some of these details, and then you go to church and your pastor, your Sunday school teacher, whatever, they're never going to go get into it really deep. They're just going to talk high level, top of the surface type of stuff.
And
They're
I
not.
was guilty of that for, gosh, decades, and, I mean, that's why it took me 6 years to deconstruct, because it took a while for all that to really sink in. I was thinking earlier before we got online together that critical thinking doesn't really require a higher level of intelligence, it just requires honesty, um, to really look at things honestly rather than, uh, with
What you
bias.
wanted to say. Yeah,
Um And that's why I deconstructed. There was no trauma, there was no
yeah.
church hurt. It was just learning to really look at it honestly and apply the same standards for evidence that I would apply to any other religion.
Another one that came up since we were talking about men and women and their stuff, Deuteronomy 22:13 through 21, it talks about like, uh, you know, guy and girl get married and then they go in and then he comes out and he says, well, she wasn't a virgin. I'm like, well, how do you know that? It's like, oh, she didn't bleed. And then the parents, they can bring out the sheet that they put down underneath whenever the deed is done and say, no, no, look, there's stuff on here. So that's the proof, and and the but if there's nothing on there, then obviously she was lying, and the penalty for her for lying is to be stoned to death, right? But then the penalty, if the guy was made a false accusation, it was like 30 shekels or something like that. It was it's very misogynist, and
Very, very
and
misogynist.
one
Yeah,
of the
and
things that
not
oh, go ahead.
every virgin bleeds after, losing her
That's
virginity.
where I was going with this. So, I have been reading through the Bible, start to finish, with my middle kid, uh, as just one because she likes to have like a little wind down before going to bed. She's a teenager, so this helps anyway. and and so I said, well, I think that we should go through the Bible and you hear this all the way through at least once. We're just reading this as we're treating it like a story, even though obviously they went with me through my deconstruction because we were all going to church and stuff all the way. I mean, for all their lives. And so she knows about the religious context, but I said, let's just treat it like a story. And so we'll just read it. And I said, it's still good to know some of these references because you'll hear them in movies and in songs and things of that nature. So I said, it's still good to know. So, and my wife would, sit in, but kind of like play on her phone, but not really act like she's paying attention until I read this passage. and then, and then she piped up and she was like, that's a bunch of horse crap. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh
Yeah.
yeah? Oh yeah? Why is that? And I said, did you bleed on your first time? And she said, no. And I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. Which means that if these laws were ever followed, I realize that there's some debate on whether or not the entirety of these laws were um, fully followed in society.
Which would
Um,
be irrelevant. It would be irrelevant whether or not they were followed. It's what's
yeah.
being taught.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, but if they were taught this, and then if anyone were to ever actually implement it, that means that innocent women would have died. That's just plain and simple because they didn't bleed.
Yeah, and that's true. I have a little bit of an issue with the term innocent because to me, having sex before marriage shouldn't be considered a crime
Mm.
anyway.
Hmm.
Even if she wasn't a virgin, she didn't deserve to be stoned to death.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Whatever a
you
virgin
know,
is, right?
let's talk about how many quote unquote sins are completely victimless. Um, Committing these is a crime against no one but this imaginary God.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
no one's hurt in it, between consenting sex among adults. Um, the only person who would get hurt is if maybe she was betrothed to someone else and cheated on him. His feelings would get hurt, but in modern day society, we don't stone to death adulterers, um, because that is a personal matter. That is between the people involved. That is that is
Right.
for them
Yeah.
to work that out. Um, that is not, that's not a reason to be stoned to death either. Yeah, I just have
Yeah.
so
I
many
don't
problems.
think anyone should be stoned to death. I mean,
Yeah,
even if a crime warrants death, I still think it's okay to have a little bit of dignity and to terminate a life in a humane way. Stoning to death sounds really awful.
yeah, yeah.
Oh man. So
Stay against the death penalty because I don't believe in a heaven or a hell. I think it's a far worse punishment to have to live out the rest of your life in prison. Rather, I think putting them to death is an easy out.
it does seem like an easy out, and
Yeah.
I'm mostly with you. There are maybe some cases. I don't know. I haven't fully formed an opinion. How about that? I'm gonna take
I had
the
to form
easy
a
way
very
out.
firm opinion because my great-grandmother was murdered in a home invasion robbery, and
Oh,
I had to testify as, I had to give a victim statement,
yeah,
because she lived in Southern California as well, that's where I currently live, and I was closest relative to her, and I had lived with her for a while. When I first moved out here, I lived with her for a year, so I was asked by the DA to give a victim statement,
yeah.
and we had a meeting in his office before, uh, going into the courtroom, and I told him, "Avoid asking me if I feel he deserves the death penalty." There were actually 3 murderers, but one particular this was just one of their trials. I said, "Because I don't care that it even was my grandmother. I don't believe in the death penalty. So if you're going for the death penalty, don't count on me to support that."
You want to hear something weird?
Because yeah, and he
My
said, "Okay, duly noted." But yeah, it's not just that I think it's an easy out. It's also because now that we have DNA evidence, there have been so many that have been
right.
exonerated from that
Hmm.
DNA evidence.
Yeah,
Uh, so yeah, I just don't believe in it.
yeah. The weird thing in this conversation is that my wife's grandfather was murdered in a home invasion. So,
It's sad that the elderly are so often the target of that. Yeah.
yeah, well, it didn't help that he won the lottery.
Oh gosh,
Yeah, he won some money, and then
they were
like a
looking for
couple of
something.
years later, some guys came looking for it, and it's like that money's gone, dude. So, uh, yeah, the death penalty is. I mean, I would rather see everybody try to be rehabilitated if possible.
I would as well. Yeah, yeah, I would as well. And
Although,
even those spending life in prison, and I think those that I think deserve to stay, and, spend the rest of their life in prison, um, they still have the opportunity, not that they all take advantage of it, to to contribute, in some
yes,
way,
yeah.
to um, maybe realize the error of their ways and then mentor other inmates, for example,
So I guess the thing of death penalty versus non imprisonment, it's just the acknowledgement that we're still talking about human beings, even though they might be horribly flawed and broken. But again, I think there's something wrong with them because a society that tries to kill itself won't last very long. So it seems to me like we should try to do what we can to rehabilitate them. So I'm saying that I lean more with you. I'm giving a little bit of a grace for somebody really heinous, and but then I have to define what that is, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. Like what? Oh, how many lives to be taken by an individual warrants the death penalty? You know what I mean? So it's a hard question to wrestle with.
Yeah, if I were to have an exception, it would be for it, like how this particular person, if for whatever reason, whatever the cause was, there was some kind of jailbreak and everybody got out, how dangerous would they be to the rest of
In
society?
society, yeah,
How likely are they to repeat their previous crimes?
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Um, you know what we should do? We should shift to
Okay.
social media and talk about that a little bit. So, if we're going to backtrack a little bit, and uh, you said that you had this following where you were, debating people, and then now, I don't know how long have you been on? Are you primarily only on Threads these days, or do
No,
you use
well,
any other social networks?
yeah, I mean, as far as if I'm gonna discuss religion, if I'm gonna debate, I'm on all the socials, but some I use more than others. Um, I've been on Threads for a long time, but originally I was on as deity free,
Okay.
because since I had left Twitter, I kept the username and I kept the Abby profile pic so that my previous, uh, followers could find me. I thought they'll recognize this because I've used this handle and photo forever, and so and it worked. I started getting a lot of, people that I recognized, and we were able to follow each other again then on Threads. Um, but Meta had a problem with me being anonymous, I guess. And at some point one day, I just couldn't log in, and they said I had to log in, using my Instagram account, which had my name and my real photo on there. And I thought, well, okay, fine. So under TJ McArdle on Threads is rather recent. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, that's where I've started debating
Yeah. Well, and yes, I've noticed.
again.
That's what that's what drew me to you. I'm like, oh wow, she likes to stir things up. That's fun. Um, and it's unfortunate that Christians tend to have a persecution complex, and they feel that
Well, it's
any.
required.
Yes, it is. That is true. Well, may they endure until the end of the age. But the the thing about that is that it's if you're like me, I don't know. I kind of wish that somebody would have challenged me sooner about some of my beliefs. Everybody was usually like way too respectful about what my beliefs were. Hardly anyone told me, "Hey, have you ever thought about this?" It was usually, well, it's probably because I surrounded myself for the most part, aside from like work and stuff like that. I mean, I went to church every Sunday. When I was younger, it was definitely more than Sunday, but was involved in the praise and worship band. My wife and I both taught Sunday school, so you tended to be surrounded by the same people that if you're going to challenge each other, you're only challenging each other on what's in the book and your understanding of it versus, challenging somebody who is really heavily involved in the book and the religion and everything else by someone who's not in it anymore or were never in it because then you have to really start to think about things. And what would you say your main draw is to aggressively negotiate with people online whenever it comes to religion?
Exposing a lot of the scripture that most people don't know about, exposing the immorality
Yeah.
of it, um, which most Christians and even a lot of non-Christians, even a lot of atheists who still believe that, oh, Christianity still teaches good. They don't believe it, but maybe they were back when I was in my kumbaya stage. They just aren't aware of the commands to commit genocide, the permission to own slaves, and we talked about stoning to death
Yeah.
um, people who can't prove that they're virgins, and so forth. Just so many people aren't even aware, and
Hmm.
I wasn't aware as a Christian. I wasn't aware of those things. And that's what planted the seeds of doubt in me. So if I can plant seeds of doubt in people the same way, and you were talking about how nobody ever challenged you. I had one person who did just before I started deconstructing. When my
Oh, yeah.
husband, my ex-husband now, when I was pregnant with my first child and I was talking or thinking about where to get her baptized, I brought it up with him and he said, it's weird because 'cause we'd been together at this point for, gosh, like 6 or 7 years, like, dated for, like, 5 years, and then we'd already been married for, like, a year or so, and I knew that he was raised a Catholic. He had been a altar boy even. Um, he didn't still go to mass, but I I thought he was still a believer, and we'd never discussed this. So when I said, "We need to find a church to have her baptized in," he said, "Why?" And that just floored me. As a still believing Christian, he said,
Yeah.
"Why do you think she needs to be baptized?" And I was just flabbergasted. I was like, "Well, so she doesn't go to hell, of course." Um, and he's like, "Why do you think she would go to hell if she's not baptized?" "Well, 'cause that's what the Bible says." And he's like, "And why do you believe the Bible?" because it's the word of God. And he said, "And
Well,
what makes you think it's
yeah.
the word of God?" And I was stunned. This is the first person in my life for like 30 years that I had ever encountered that had posed these questions that it was like, "What makes you think the Bible is true?" You know? And I was like, and then I realized he had deconstructed, unbeknownst to me.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so that kind of, I think, gave me the permission. It didn't happen instantaneously, but then as I started reading the Bible and I got, started having that crisis of faith, I thought, maybe he's on to something."
I should be clear for the readers or the listeners. Yeah, I feel like I'm back in my journalism days. Uh,
I lost
to be
you.
fair,
I lost you,
I
so
don't
I didn't hear it.
Oh, I said I should be fair to the listeners that I'm not sure that the Bible says that if you're not baptized you'll go to hell, but that doesn't mean that people don't believe that, because I totally think they do, and I think the Catholic Church. I don't think it would be wrong to say that
In
they
my
believe that.
Protestant upbringing, I was baptized as a baby, so I yeah, it definitely, I don't know where it was specifically. I don't recall if I've ever come across a specific passage, about that, but yeah, that's definitely what they believe, and I believed it.
Yeah. I don't think it's cut and dry. I mean, some of the apologetics would be like, well, the thief that was on the cross, he didn't get a chance to get baptized, and Jesus said that he'd be with him today in paradise. So, therefore, you don't have to be baptized. It's just an act of obedience. That's what I was always taught. Um, but then you're like, well, if it's an act of obedience and you don't do it, then wouldn't that be a sin? So, that's the problem with this whole thing, is that you can make excuses and have all sorts of disagreements about what the text says, and nobody has any agreement. I mean, that's why we have so many different
Yeah,
denominations.
even Christians within the same denominations can't
Oh,
agree
yeah.
with each other. I always get a little bit amused. I shouldn't say that it's amusing, but it is when I'm in a discussion and then the Christians start arguing with each other. And
I
I'm
mean,
like, how
it
am
is
I supposed
interesting.
to yeah, how am I supposed to, take either of you seriously or any of you seriously when you can't even agree amongst yourselves?
Well, one of the biggest things that I've seen on socials, and maybe this is what people think in their head in real life, I don't know, is, oh, you don't believe in God. And the next statement would be, so you just think we came from nothing. And I'm like, I don't understand why we have to intrinsically tie these two things together. Like, because there are people that are like they still believe in God and they believe in Jesus and they would call themselves Christian. And yet they believe in evolution. They believe in the Big Bang. Like or I should, instead of say believe, I should say they don't reject it. They don't
They
reject
accept it.
evolution. Yes, they accept
I
it.
wanna insert here. Did you know, and you may already, but probably a lot of your listeners didn't know that we first heard about the Big Bang from a Catholic priest.
Yeah, I used what's his name? Lemaitre?
I
George
think he was French
Lemaitre?
or something. He wasn't, yeah, I can't remember his name either, but, yeah, so many Christians or theists, even Muslims, think that accepting evolution is an atheist thing. It's,
Mhm.
it's they're not even connected. It l
Yeah,
that's something I definitely wanted to get into is the creationism argument.
okay.
Um, when somebody
What
brings
do you
up the
got?
creation argument with me online, I might entertain it for a little bit, but I tell them ultimately, I don't care if there was a creator. All you're doing when you argue for creationism, all they're doing is arguing for deism. They are
Yeah,
not arguing for their theology. They're not arguing for their specific God. A deistic God doesn't care what I do, who I have sex with. There's
right.
no punishment, there's no reward, no heaven or hell. There's no text, there's no clergy. we can't characterize a deistic God. All it is an argument for a creator. And so it has no effect on my life, no effect on society. Deism isn't out there oppressing anyone. It's not out there starting wars. So I usually just say, I don't even want to get into this with you because I'm not invested in disproving whether or not the universe was created. Show me proof that it was your God that did it.
Right. Yeah. I'm I'm often in the same boat because I often feel like, well, I kind of don't care that much. I mean, what am I going to do about it? I mean, I'm here and I wasn't there when whatever happened. And and frankly, I've watched so I watch a lot of sci-fi, right?
Mhm.
Because for right now, that's how I'm getting through these times. And I don't think I have to
I
tell you
like
what
sci
these times mean. Yeah. And so there was an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. You got Captain Picard with his wonderful bald head, and him and three other alien races. They all hold a piece of some sort of like genetic DNA puzzle that they're trying to sort out. This is a big like science like scavenger hunt, right? And they're trying to figure out what does all this mean. And they end up coming together on this planet. And then whenever they're on the planet, they I don't know, Picard, the other three are arguing and he decides to do something since he's got all the DNA pieces and he puts it into his machine. And then this hologram shows up, right? And the hologram talks about how, like, oh, we're an alien race and we came to, where you guys were, the building blocks for your universe was just getting started. And we dropped off our, for lack of a better word, seed, to grow your species. And now you guys have figured it all out, and you're back together. And please honor us, because we're long dead. But take this and do something with it. And I was like, huh, that's just as plausible
Yeah, I
as
mean, just
you know,
as plausible. It's
yeah,
maybe even more so.
yeah. Uh, And then after I finished The Next Generation, then I decided there was some talk online about Battlestar Galactica. And I was like, man, I haven't watched that since it came out, which it came out in 2003 and ran for 4 seasons. So it's been about 20 years, right? I'm like, I should give it a rewatch. So that's what I'm going through right now. Well, the whole thing about Battlestar Galactica is that there's this race of people, they call themselves human. And then, have you ever seen Battlestar Galactica?
If maybe just bits and pieces and a long
Okay.
time ago, so
Okay, I'm going to give a
don't
spoiler
really
alert, but
remember
it's
it.
been 20 years, so it's not my fault. But spoiler alert: the the humans made machines that were sentient. Sounds a little eerily prescient. And then
Yeah,
they rebelled, and then there was basically a ceasefire for a long time, and then the machines came back, and they were even more advanced. They had learned how to mimic humans in every shape and form. Like they looked like humans, they talked like humans, they bled like humans, and but they also were just weapon powerhouses. Like they overpowered all the humans, and then the humans had to pretty much go into exile with like 50,000 people. Fast forward 4 seasons to the end, they end up on a planet that was mythology to them, but was from their mythology. They end up on a planet called Earth. And they decide to send the ships into the sun. They stay behind on Earth, and then they integrate with the newly emerging humans that are starting to show up on Earth, and then they just continue forward. And then, of course, um, it you have what we are today. So they're alluding to the fact that, like, oh, these were actually humans that started off in a completely different galaxy and then came here. Also just about as plausible from a creation standpoint as or evolution standpoint as the Bible, because it's all just stories, and
yeah,
yeah, I don't know that I care. I mean, because honestly, what do I got, 75 years to 100 max? I mean, the way I've lived, yeah, probably closer to 75. And then I'll die, and in 2 generations no one will remember me ever again. So that's it just seems so bizarre that Christians get so hung up, and I'm sure, maybe other religions do too. I just that's what I know the most
Yeah,
about.
they get hung up on the God of the gaps fallacy,
Yeah.
and it's always to them, the only plausible explanation is a God, and we just came up with several other plausible scenarios, and
Yeah.
they say, "Well, if not God, then what?" And it isn't always the creation argument either. Sometimes it's like, well, a good example would be the empty tomb. Well, how else do you explain the empty tomb? I can come up with a ton of far more plausible reasons why there was an empty tomb. But first of all, prove to me that there was an empty tomb. You know, let's start there. But even if you could prove that, I can come up with lots of explanations for why there was an empty tomb, and none of them supernatural. So far more plausible.
See, and this is what we should do. We should invite Christians to come read the Bible with us and then show them how we read the Bible, because critical thinking requires you to keep asking a whole bunch of like sub questions or the questions behind the questions, right? It's like, why? Why? Like a little kid, like, you've had kids in your life, you know how it works. They come to you and you're like, hey,
Yeah.
don't do that.
Well,
Why?
that is kind of my strategy. I always ask in the form of question, and I think that's what is the Socratic method. I
Hmm.
might be wrong,
Yes.
but I always ask things in the form of a question. I already know the answer. They don't It's just amazing how many times they don't understand that's what I'm doing, though, and they really genuinely don't think they really genuinely think I wanna know, and all I'm doing is just saying, "Does this sound logical to you?" I mean,
I
come on,
mean,
let's really think about it, and it's adorable when they just well, they'll say, "Well, you asked, and I answered."
yeah.
Like, but, does that make sense to you? That's the real question I'm getting at.
It's very hard to get past, does it make sense whenever you're really indoctrinated? And I've given thought about the word indoctrination and how it usually gets framed as something that is forced upon you, usually at a young age. Like, it's easy to think about young kids going to vacation Bible school and being terrorized or something like that. Um, but if you keep going every Sunday when you're an adult, you're still being indoctrinated. And that was something that I had to come to grips with, that as an adult, I was still being pumped full of propaganda that I did nothing to stop.
And not just from your church, but just from the society in US in general,
Hmm.
because the majority of citizens are still Christians, even though that number is getting lower and lower, which I'm very happy about. But um, you're being indoctrinated by your peers. It's like being a little kid, and all of the other little kids believe in Santa Claus, and so you just keep believing in Santa Claus because everybody else does. Um, and people
Yeah.
talk about choice and how, well, you chose to be an atheist, and I say atheism isn't a choice, it's a conclusion. And I concluded that there is no God, just the same way I concluded around the age of 8 or 9 that there is no Santa Claus. And I could no easier go back to believing in the God of the Bible or any other God than I could go back to believing in Santa Claus. It's like in the scene in The Wizard of Oz when they pull back the curtain and they see the guy back there pulling the levers. There's no going
Hmm.
back from that, you
No.
know? I can't choose, to say, "Okay, well, I'm gonna go back to believing." Um, I might I could choose to say that I'm believing. I could choose to pretend that I'm believing, but would I genuinely believe after I've seen that guy pulling the levers behind that curtain?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
That's why I get a little nervous about people that deconstruct because they were hurt. I mean, like you, I also did not have a lot of I don't recall church hurt really. I mean, the most hurt I might have had was like, man, I don't want to get up at 6 o'clock on a Sunday to go unload
Yeah,
a,
okay, yeah,
a
same here.
church in a box and do stuff. But that was about it. Any kind of, I mean, yeah, you're going to have disagreements with people, but we worked it out. I never left a church because I was like, I'm so mad, I mean, or they really hurt me. It was never anything like that. And the people that deconstruct and like say, well, I don't believe because of that. I'm like, well, I encourage you to keep digging. Like make sure that your unbelief is on solid ground because that feels a little bit more like an emotional decision rather than a thinking one. But that's then again, something emotional usually probably started a deconstruction. Like for you, it was looking at how horrible the stories were. For me, it was my dad had Alzheimer's, and he was a deacon in the church, and he had always pretty faithfully served, and I was really trying to reconcile the idea of an all-loving God and then unnecessary pain. you know I'm like, why don't you just take him now? Like if this
Free
is how it's
will,
going to be, you know
free
free,
will.
free
Oh,
will.
he chose that pain.
Yeah, I
I
don't know.
I
He was
heard
saved though.
something really so simple that I can't believe I didn't think of it myself, but so brilliant on a podcast the other day on a YouTube whatever that new one that Matt Dillahunty's on now, not the Atheist
The
Experience.
line,
There's a new one.
the line.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
So yeah, I was just kind of scrolling through the other night and I came across one and it wasn't him. He was there, but it was the other speaker who came up with this. And I'm going to have to pull it up in my notes now because I want to remember exactly what it was. I keep notes. If you ever wonder how I respond so quickly on threads, it's because I
because you
have
gotta.
this all in notes and I can copy and paste. Oh, can anything happen that is not God's will? Now,
No.
every Christian is going to say everything is God's will. Everything is according to his plan. Well, if nothing can happen that is not a part of his will, then we don't have free will.
Right.
And it's so simple. And maybe
Yeah.
you've thought of that, but I hadn't thought of phrasing it that way.
I hadn't
Um,
thought of it. There's a guy that I like to watch. His name's Joel. He reads Bible. His channel is called Joel Reads Bible. And so he'll read through the Bible, but read through it from an atheist perspective. But he also has debate, and he's got a friend named Mezzo, and they found each other online. And I'm just so happy for their little love story. It's a friendship. It's like the friend that I was talking about from Kansas. I often think, oh man, that could have been us, because of how they play off of each other. But he had a really good thing. He's got a thing on his website, or on his YouTube channel, where he uh, deconstructs some different doctrines. And he did one on free will. And he said, you don't have free will. Christians don't have free will, like in the way that they think they do. What they have is free choice. And he made that important distinction for exactly what the reason that you just said, because if everything happens or nothing happens without God permitting it, then you don't have truly free
but
will.
did but
You
did
just have the
we
choice to follow
choose?
it.
Did we choose to exist? We didn't.
That's true.
He expanded on this with the caller by giving the analogy of being forced to play a game because he was a gamer, so he was really into this. So he said, let's say I wake up in a room one day. I have no idea how I got there. Um, but I'm there and I can't get out. I can't get out of this room. And in this room, there's a gaming console and there's a note on it that says, play me. And I'm thinking, okay, if I want to get out of this room, I got to play this game. So I'm playing the game. And okay, I can make choices within the game on each move I'm going to make, but I had no choice in being locked up in that room and being forced to play that game. That was not a choice. So, I mean, if God is all knowing, he already knows what we're what choices we're gonna make.
Yeah,
And
that's
yet
true.
and for us atheists, or those of us who end up as atheists, he chose to create us anyway. We did not choose to play the game. He put us in the game.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, he described it. This is um, a very sick game that God is playing with us when he forces us to play the game and then punishes for not making the right quote unquote choices.
Right. And I like to go back even further to the Genesis story because if they I'm sure you've heard this argument that if Adam and Eve didn't have the knowledge that came from eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil,
Then how
then
did they know?
they couldn't have known that God was telling them the truth or lying, or that they
They
wouldn't
had
have known that the serpent was telling the truth or
If
lying.
they had no knowledge of what's, right and wrong, then how would they know that it was wrong to take a bite out of the apple?
Right.
And
And
again,
then
we're back to God playing a sick game, because why did he put that tree in the middle of the garden to begin with?
well, that's just a metaphor. Uh, which for me, then that answer becomes, well, if that story is just a metaphor, then the concept of original sin doesn't exist, which means that Jesus's death wasn't necessary for anything. Um, and
Right,
to me, it's very simple to break. Once you're out of it, then you start looking at this shit, and you're just like, none of this makes any sense. This was
right,
clearly
and do
written
you
by
find that the longer you're out of it, the less it makes sense, the more ridiculous
yes,
it is?
yes,
The
yes.
the farther you distance yourself from it, yeah.
Well, it doesn't help that I continue to read and study this stuff because I do find it fascinating. I
I
find
do
that
too, I do, yeah.
yeah,
It's
I
my
find
hobby.
these yeah, I
It's
find these
my
stories
pastime. It's just
fascinating. Yeah.
it's fascinating, and that's the yeah, I love spending my free time studying it. I go back to the Bible. I have to go back to the Bible all the time to pull up all those passages that people tell me aren't there, or that I'm misinterpreting or whatever, so
What's your
I
favorite version?
I don't have a favorite version, but I have a favorite website. BibleGateway.com. I
Yeah,
get on there
I use
because
that a
it
lot.
shows me all of the probably not all of the versions that have ever existed in history. I'm sure not, because I think there's been hundreds or even thousands of versions, but I think every version that's still in publication, that's still in circulation, there's like 40 something, I think. It shows you can pull up any version. So then when a Christian that I'm debating says, "Well, my Bible doesn't say that. Which version are you pulling that from?" I just
Yeah,
ask them, "Just tell me what version what version do you wanna see?" I can pull it up, and I just pull it up on BibleGateway.com, copy paste. Um, yeah.
yeah,
Then I
yeah.
also own, I don't know where it is, I haven't seen it anywhere since I started using BibleGateway.com. I don't use it anymore, but I purchased, um I don't remember the name of it, but that Bible that has 4 versions in one, and
Oh,
they're in
yeah,
each page is 4 columns, so you
yeah.
can
It's
compare right
huge.
there on the page,
What
each
was that?
verse.
Was
Uh,
it the Living Bible? No, maybe not.
no, I wanna call it like the Peterson Bible or something like that, but a Bible that with 4 different versions.
Yeah, my parents had that. It never got opened. Like that was the one Bible. It just sat there. Like everybody had their own Bibles. So, but that one, maybe it was handed down or something, and I have no idea where it's at now. But I thought it was interesting. I'm like, oh, cool. You can have four different versions.
Parallel, yeah. I think they call those
The
they're
parallel. Yes.
yeah, then there's probably more than one, but yeah, it's called a parallel Bible.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is the same one that I had, but this one that I just looked up online has the NIV, the KJV, the NASB, and Amplified, all together.
It had. You did say KJV because
Mhm.
that's the most important version of all time ever. Uh, I actually can't believe that anyone still reads that because I just don't like the prose. I mean, I don't talk like that. Forsooth. Um, dost thou need anything from the store,
So many
my lady?
defer
Yeah.
to King James. It's really yeah, it's unbelievable that there are so many still that
Yeah, that's like its own cult. Like it's a cult within a cult, where you're like, no, we're King James only. and that to me just whenever I hear that, I'm just like, oh, I'm so sorry. You're one of those people. All right. So we should probably wrap this up, but I wanted to do a live experiment with you, even though this is recorded. So with you, go to your Threads feed and just find one. Just find one that stands out as being obnoxious. And let's just read it.
Okay,
Let's
I'll
just read
click
it and
on my
talk about it.
mentions and see what the latest is. Let's see. I've
Okay.
got a lot of um well, the most obnoxious Christian probably lately is this one who is I brought up slavery. I asked him, "Why are you following a book that, permits slavery blah 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 blah." And of course he comes back, "It does not." And so I brought up the Leviticus 44 verse and I said, "Tell me the difference between this and chattel slavery." And his difference was it wasn't race based.
wasn't race based. Uh-huh.
And
Sure.
I'm like, "So tell me where." I've looked up the definition of chattel slavery. I'll look it up again right now, and I don't there's nothing that requires chattel slavery to be race-based. I don't think. Yeah, no, chattel slavery is just,
No, it's just you're
if
treated as property.
so I asked him, "Well, so are you telling me that slavery is okay as long as other races, would you want to be?" Okay, let me click on his. Yeah, yeah, I'm clicked on his profile. He's black. So I said, "Would you be okay with being a slave then as long as it was another black person enslaving you? Are you saying it's only wrong if it's race-based?"
Mhm.
It just yeah, he's just really it's not chattel slavery. It's and he can't what were his other reasons?
Yeah, and see,
He
that's what
had
we're
the
talking about, right? Like
it
trying to
wasn't
look at this,
race-based.
like what
Also, the
does the
slaves,
text actually say?
they become a part of Israel. I said, "Well, in antebellum South, in the US, those slaves became a part of America, you know." What else was his man? Oh, stealing. Oh, they bring up Exodus 21:16, which they interpret as if you enslave somebody, and it is not that. Exodus 21:16 is about if you steal another man's slave, then you get stoned to death. Um, and it's obvious because the rest of Exodus 21 is telling you who you can enslave, and it's calling your slaves property. So there's no way that Exodus 21:16 then is in the middle. The same chapter or the same book is going to tell you, and chapter, same book and chapter is going to in this one single verse 16 is going to say, but you can't enslave people.
Right,
Here's,
right.
all the ones before it are here's who you can enslave and here's how you enslave them. And it calls them property. And, in the English translations, it uses the word property, calls your slaves property. But, they always bring that up. And what else? Oh, slaves had protections. If the master permanently injured a slave, the slave went free. Like these were his four this list of his rebuttal, explaining to me the difference between chattel slavery and Leviticus 44. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
obnoxious, and it's
Yeah,
outrageous.
and you know
But they're all
what's really
obnoxious.
challenging is that there is this law, Brandolini's law. Are you familiar with this? Brandolini's law is an internet adage. I'm reading off Wikipedia. Is an internet adage coined in 2013 by Italian programmer Alberto Bandolini, and he says the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than is needed to produce it. And this is the problem, right? Like you have this concept of like, oh no, God's not for slavery. That was a different time. God dealt with those people differently, blah, blah, blah. We've heard all the excuses.
Then he's
So,
not an all-knowing, all-powerful
yeah,
God. He's restricted to the cultural norms of a very specific era and a very specific culture. Then he's not all-powerful. Also,
right.
they're using it's a subjective morality argument from people who are insisting that the Bible is giving objective morality. The whole "it was a different time" argument is subjective.
That's true. It's very subjective. And so, if God doesn't change, then why did he change? Uh, but it's very easy to make those short quips and stick it out there, uh, and then you're like, well, if we follow Brandolini's law here as an example, my last episode where Andrew, who used to be in ministry, and what got him out was the slavery issue. He and I sat down and we talked about slavery in the New Testament. That went on for 2 hours and 45 minutes. And then the first episode where we talked about the Old Testament was equally as long. It was a few hours. So the problem is that if you want to try to talk about these topics, to really get into it, ooh, you got to go deep, and it's probably going to take some time. It's difficult.
Mm, yeah, but I don't mind because I have so much fun doing it.
Yeah, it's good. Well, I'm glad you do it, and I enjoy it, and who knows? Maybe we could do something more like a debate or something like that. I think you should consider that. I mean, that's just me. I think you should consider like a
I would
live
love
debate.
to.
You know,
I would love to.
you
Bring
know.
on the Christians and let's debate them.
Yeah, and I'm totally more interested in a conversation rather than necessarily getting into. I mean, I fall prey to being angry about this stuff, just like many of us do, because it's so frustrating. It's like, how do you
It
not
does get
see this? I'm like,
frustrating.
oh my
I do
gosh. Yeah,
yeah, I do tend I don't I'm usually well, first of all, I don't usually debate people in person, you know? I just leave it alone unless they kind of force me into it, unless they bring it up and then, you know. But, um,
yeah,
but
same. Like,
when they come to my door,
yeah,
yeah,
I got all excited. I had Jehovah's Witness.
I've lost my sometimes I look at it and I think, "Oh, this is gonna be fun." But, yeah, it
Hmm.
gets so frustrating that I do start to lose my patience then and then get angry, just like Matt Dillahunty does now. He's gotten less and less and less patient over time. I've noticed.
See, I was thinking that he was trying to be more patient these days. I think
Did you
he's,
think
yeah,
the last few thing I and it's just been very recently too, just in the last couple of days, I've been watching him and I used to defend him. I still love him, and I used to defend him. They'd say, "Oh, all he does is yell and hang up on people," and I used to think, "Well, yeah, because, people are so stupid." You get so frustrated, but I've noticed again, it's just in my opinion, he's gotten worse, where he's just mute, 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 and I'm like, "Okay, I don't know, maybe some of these people have a point. Maybe he needs to find a different
he's been
way
doing
to
it a
ex."
long time. So,
He's been doing this a long time, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
but
Well,
I still love him. He always makes excellent points. I love it when he gets into the morality debate. That's my favorite. That eh, the claim that morality comes from the Bible. That's my favorite thing to debate. This is my favorite thing to tear apart.
it's probably my least favorite.
Really?
Yeah, because I kind of don't care because I feel like it's so subjective. And maybe that's why you like it, just because you're proving how subjective it really is. But um, to me, it's obvious. I'm like, obviously, it's subjective. I mean, we've got a divided society in America right now because we have subjective ways of looking at the issues. I'm being very generous when
And
I
I
just
think it's
call them
been that way
issues.
throughout history. I mean, I bring up the zeitgeist a lot and how the zeitgeist in every culture just continues to evolve.
Right.
And because we do tend to come to the majority anyway in each culture, it's different in different cultures. Obviously, the zeitgeist in a Muslim country is going to be very different than what we have here. Um, but it does evolve based off of the majority consensus, and I think that's the closest thing that we have to any kind of objective moral code
Yeah.
is what what have we evolved to come to believe as a society. But other than that, yeah, it is subjective, and a lot of people think that means it's just a free for all. You can just do whatever, and I disagree because I still have a basis for which I determine my morality.
Mhm.
which is,
Yeah, I have
what
morals, and they're mine.
yeah,
You
I
know?
still have my I love it when they say, if you don't believe the Bible, then on what basis can you say this is wrong? They'll say, on what basis can you say the Holocaust was wrong? And I'll say, on what basis as a Christian can you say that genocide is wrong when the Bible commands it? If you
Mm,
think it's wrong, then you came to that conclusion the same way that I did. You
very
didn't
good
get
point.
that. You didn't come to that conclusion from the Bible.
Yeah,
So, you know, I don't I may not be able to always articulate in it perfectly how I came to that conclusion, but I know that the Christians who agree that genocide is wrong came to it the same way that I did. They
uh,
didn't get that from the Bible.
and I've heard it said, and I have to agree with this, that they came to that position in spite of their religion, not because of
Yeah,
it.
in spite of it. And yet they think they're getting their morality from the Bible. And I think the majority of them who will say that, who will argue that with me, haven't read the whole Bible. And then if they do, and a lot of times I'll bring up the genocide verses, and then they'll come back later, and I can tell that they were visiting all of the apologetics websites.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of the times I suspect they had never heard of those verses before, and now before they respond to me, they're frantically, Googling the apologetics websites to come up with some kind of rebuttal, and then that's when I get that very subjective argument. Then it was a different time, or
Mhm.
God wasn't saying slavery was okay, he was just regulating it, that. And I'll say, well, if you regulate how your kids commit arson, you're still telling your kids it's okay to commit arson. you know it's so
That's
yeah,
very subjective.
I love the morality. I love the morality debate. I love it.
Well, I've really appreciated this, or enjoyed this, and I appreciate you coming on.
Have as well, and I
You know.
appreciate you asking me to come on. This was a lot of fun. Let's do it again.
Okay, yeah. You've given me some things to think about. That's for sure. That I hadn't considered, and then also you're giving me ideas for future things that we'll discuss offline. It sounds good. So, all right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.